just got out of the steam room. It's one of those days where I have trouble seeing because it just clouds my eyes up. So I can't really see the numbers, whether there's anyone here. Talk to me. I can see text, usually, if I get really close. So this is a fun topic. Just forget non-duality for a second. Don't think of it like that. Think of this as like a radical way to recover from especially addictions and compulsions. Of course, it's non-dual based, and so the result of it is a deeper abiding as awareness and embodiment. But I'm not talking about that right now. I want to talk about a new model of recovery and the richness that it brings to one's life. But more importantly, I want to talk about the environment that it happens in, where it really works well, and then environments in which it doesn't work well. Thank you, Serena. Okay, rewind. When I said the story of when Dan, my co-developer, came to live with me, and instead of judging or shaming him around his addiction, just offered no reaction, didn't create anxiety in me. I didn't get angry at him. I didn't shame him. I didn't judge him. And so for the first time, he could get out from under all that shame and judgment that he had been experiencing in the 12-step program and other places in his family. And for the first time being in that kind of relationship, it's like he was just invited into inquiry then. So there were no rules about whether he uses or doesn't use, because the rules had gotten in the way, in the sense that when he heard people saying, this is what you have to do or what you shouldn't do, when anyone says that to you, there's at least the potential. It's like, well, I'm going to fucking do it then. Because like a defiance, or you feel shamed. So you just go do it, but you do it secretly. So all that was gone. And Dan was able then to truly recover, because all of that pressure was off and he was just doing radical inquiry. So that was the environment for that. We took note of that. That environment where you're not shaming and judging, and you're just loving someone exactly how they are, whether they've used or not used. And you have to do some work energetically, because even if you have the idea that you don't want to shame or judge someone, your body keeps the score. And people feel you. So you could be saying with your mouth, I don't judge you, and no matter what you do, I love you. But your body is sending different messages. And many addicts, if they're not empathic, which many of them are, they at least have learned how to put up antennas and call out bullshit, because that's how they survive. That's how I survived, having these antennas up. So it's like someone comes, you have to, because when you're addicted like I was, you have to create a wall of secrecy to keep the addiction going. So you have to have the radar or the antennas up to determine who can I trust, who can I say things to, and who should I just completely shut out so that I can continue to be addicted. So this is what you're dealing with when you have someone close to you or you're addicted. You are, carefully monitoring the people around you. So the work is not just like, you hear these like 5 tips for not shaming a loved one when they have an addiction or mental health issue. And you read them and you go, and it says, don't say this and don't say that, and don't use you statements, use I statements, be solution oriented, all that stuff. It's great information, but if your body still keeps the score on feeling of helplessness, anger, anxiety, any old programs, then what the person really experiences is, even though you're saying that, you're judging me, and I can feel it. I can feel your anxiety. I can feel your anger and frustration. So the point there is, in order to create a new model environment where there's really unconditional love, one has to do work. Everyone has to do work on themselves, because until they show up energetically in a loving and accepting way, energetically, not what you say. So that's tricky, because not everybody around someone who's suffering with addiction even thinks it's important to do that kind of work. Because there's often a focus on, oh, it's my son, he's got the problem. I'm just the parent trying to help him see, but it's not really like that. Addiction is a family affair. It's a family dynamics issue. So the addiction got created in part from the genetics that were passed down and the environment growing up. So any traumas that were in the household or any kind of parental unconsciousness that played into the development of the addiction. So the family dynamics are very much part of the drivers under addiction. So then when the child becomes ready for treatment or help, the same family that was involved unconsciously in the development of that addiction comes and says, "Oh, now that's your problem. That's not mine. You have an addiction." Being blind to the fact that part of the reason that that even was created was the family dynamics, the traumas, the parental unconsciousness. So there's a real blind spot for people on that issue, thinking that the only work to be done is on with the so-called addict or the person with the mental health issue or brain difference, as they say. Okay, so understanding that context is that addiction doesn't happen in a vacuum. It comes, it's a result of genetics. This is science, genetics and environment. And environment includes all the traumas, the drivers that we talk about, the shaming, the household, how it operates, how parents think, how they discipline, how they relate to the child, how they respond to the child. All of that plays into the development of mental health issues and addiction. So the family is never free of that from the beginning. So when they get to the place again where they want to help the person, if they think that they're not part of it, blind spot. Dan's family understood that it was a family dynamic. So they came to do their work on their own, mother and father and Dan. And that family is healthy now. I mean, every family has its issues, but that family understood that it's a dynamics there. So they all came to get work. And that had a profound effect on Dan. That's all public. Dan has shared it on, he and his mother did a really beautiful interview on our Radical Recovery Summit. If you want to go check out Radical Recovery Summit, um, just Google it. We sponsor that, the Killaby Center. And one year, Lynn, the moderator, kudos Lynn, she's great. She interviewed me and Dan and his mother. I cried. You ever see me cry? Because I'm just listening to them. Um, but it's poignant to listen to what happens when an entire family heals and the profound effect that has on people. So there's the ideal environment, is like the one that Dan had with me, where unconditional acceptance and love, no shaming, no judgment, just an invitation to inquiry, to look at the drivers, unravel, dismantle the trauma, the stories that are driving it. There's ideal. And then an ideal situation within a family would be that the family is woke to the fact that the family dynamics played a part of that. So when it comes time for the son or the spouse to get help, they understand that family dynamics are a part of that. And then they do the work needed to not judge and not shame and have a more mature, awakened perspective around what's happening to the family. So that's ideal right there. And in an ideal world, we're going to put a new model of recovery on our new site. There's going to be a section, and Dan and I and others like Diane, who've been living this, are going to help people with this. We're going to give you the tools. We're going to interact with you. We're going to have meetings, workshops. We're going to teach you what it is we're doing and so that you can live it. But one of the things we're going to be talking about is environment, because environment is really important. Let me give you two scenarios here. These are just going to be nameless people. But I want you to imagine that there's a husband who has a cocaine issue. Okay. This is a hypothetical, but it actually happens. So I'm just changing names and scenario and changing the facts to protect those people. This is actually something that happens a lot. So if you hear something and it's like, oh, he's talking about my family, I can assure you that I'm not. I'm talking about a scenario that happens where, again, one of the family members is addicted, let's say to cocaine, husband, and let's say the wife, um, out of her own unconsciousness, shames and judges and is fearful of what might happen. So all of that fear and anger and deficiency and trauma gets projected onto the husband. Now, the result of that is the husband then goes into secrecy to protect himself from all that. And let's say the kids get involved too, because they're watching dad fall and they're getting scared. And the unconsciousness of the wife just spreads right through to the children. So the entire family, on some level, is judging and shaming and externally pressuring the husband to quit. And then what happens is because external pressure is a driver. In other words, when people pressure you to quit, it can actually drive the compulsion. If you don't, if you haven't experienced that, the forbidden fruit example is like, if there's fruit here and you tell me I can't have it, all I'm going to do is wait for you to leave, then I'm going to have it. Because you're trying to tell me, you're trying to control me, I won't have it. It's like, fuck you, I'm going to do it. So the pressure that the family's giving actually increased the compulsion, the shaming, the judgment. There was re-traumatization happening. So the husband already felt traumatized by this, and then it just keeps happening. And every time it happens, the husband wants to go use cocaine. That environment is not conducive for a new model of recovery. Because no matter how much work we do with the husband or the husband does on themselves, the chances are the family is not open because of where they're coming from. That consciousness that's still reacting and responding in that way. Now, if the family is open, we can then do the work as a family. But in this scenario, assume that the family isn't open. So it's going to be very difficult for that husband to do new model because even if he starts to get clear of these traumas and all these things, the family just keeps coming at him. See that? So every time the family comes at him, it's like the shaming reoccurs, the deficiency story, and then it's back to the cocaine. And that's a cycle that technically would never end unless something just came in to totally disrupt it. But all the dynamics are there, the ingredients for continued addiction, chronic relapsing, as they say. That environment isn't conducive to new model. Does it mean that that husband can't do new model? No, you can do this work. You can inquire into all these drivers, but you cannot change other people through inquiry. You can't do a bunch of inquiry and make your whole family stop judging you. It just doesn't usually happen because they have their own consciousness there, believing what they're believing. So no matter how clear you get, you're going to still feel that, and that might drive it. So what does a person like that do? You could, well, let's talk about that. If you come to the new forum and you have that kind of situation, what I would say the best thing would be to bring the whole family in to a call, a conference with a professional, with with me, with Dan, with someone, so we can educate the family about this. So that the family can just, first of all, hear that despite their efforts, which feel well intentioned, they're actually contributing to the compulsion. And sometimes when you say that to family members, they start to become open, but their unconsciousness is so strong that it wins out. So they can't hear it from the mind and then just change their mind around. It's very difficult because you can't fix the problem with the same mind that created it. But if the family then becomes interested in inquiry and somatic work, real transformation can happen in the whole family. And then that dynamic is beneficial to the one with the addiction. This also applies to mental health issues in very similar ways. All right, that's scenario A. Scenario B, let's say here it is a husband and a wife, and we'll just say the wife is addicted to alcohol. So so now let's switch those roles. Let's keep it with the husband, keep it as cocaine. The husband is doing cocaine, addicted. The wife is not shaming or judging, doesn't have that, but is afraid of what happens when the husband does cocaine. Because let's say the husband becomes verbally abusive or physically violent, and it only happens when the husband's on cocaine. Just go with this scenario. So then you can see how cocaine becomes the focus. And so even though the wife, let's say every time the husband does cocaine, the wife leaves the house for safety. Because if she were to stay, he would be on coke and verbally abusive, physically abusive. So she leaves, and she learns to leave to seek safety each time. Now, the husband can interpret that as you're shaming me or you're judging me, you're pressuring me, which backfires, and it makes me want to just do it more. Or the husband could actually see it for what it is and say, she's just seeking safety. She's not saying I should or shouldn't do cocaine. There's no pressure, there's no judgment. She's just seeking safety. And how the husband sees that means everything. And how the wife operates in that situation means everything. Because if the wife isn't clear in and of herself around this, she may be seeking safety in a way that is shaming and judging in a way that does pressure the husband, creating more compulsion. But if the wife is clear, and so much of this has to do with whether each person is doing the right work on themselves. If the wife gets clear and then seeks safety, and the husband sees it isn't about me. I mean, it's about my violence, but it's not about my cocaine use. She's leaving simply to be safe. She's not leaving as an ultimatum. So we do that sometimes, right? We leave as a way to try to control the other. So I'm going to leave the marriage as a way to threaten you to stop doing cocaine. But let's say that's not happening. The wife is just leaving for safety. Then the husband wouldn't interpret that as shaming or judgment, so it doesn't increase the compulsion. That husband has a new model environment. See that? Because there's no way that we would say to someone, if you're being abused physically, verbally, that you should stay there during that. Seeking safety is, even if you leave the relationship, that's understandable. Can you see the difference in all this? So it's not like one can't seek safety. That can happen. But if you're going to stay in that relationship, be super clear within yourself as to the motives. You're going to be afraid, and just being vulnerable about that, just saying, I'm afraid. A lot of people say, I'm afraid, that you're using cocaine, and that's fine. You want to nonviolently express that. I'm afraid that you're using cocaine and this affects me this way, and I'm afraid for you that you're going to die or something. That's not the kind of, you can share that if you want. What I'm saying is where the wife says, I'm afraid that when you use cocaine, you become violent. It's not about the cocaine. It's about how you act on cocaine. It scares me. That's all. So I'm going to leave. If you're going to choose to do cocaine, that's your choice. No judgment. But I'm going to seek safety. If there's clear communication, if there's clear communication, that shouldn't or may not trigger the husband, depending on how clear the husband is around all the drivers. Can you see those different scenarios? So when we start working with you on new model, one of the things we're going to ask you is, tell me about your environment. Now, let's talk about the 12-step environment, because that's an environment. There are many people doing this work with one foot still in the 12-step program and one foot in a new model, this new model. And because of that, and that's fine, actually, what we do is we encourage anything that works, basically. But with one foot in the 12-step program, you may be going to certain meetings. I don't want to lump all of 12-step into this. I mean, in terms of the story, 12-step probably saved my life. So if you hear me saying things that sound like I'm shooting darts at it, it's really not. I'm discerning differences in my own path. If you get threatened, just look at that. What are you defending? It's the same old question, ego. Just listen to me for a second. You're still in that environment. So you may be going to meetings or you may have a sponsor or friends in there that completely unwittingly they're sending the signal of pressure, shaming, and judging. And so, for example, if you resume use, which we call it resuming use at the Kilby Center, and in New Model, they call it relapsing in 12 step. So if you relapse, what can happen is that you're welcomed back into the room, but because people aren't energetically clear, so they might say to you, oh man, that's fine, dude, come right back. We love you. And some people are really clear in the program. So when they say that, their body aligns with it. So the person who relapsed doesn't hear any other signal. It's all in alignment. And that's a good environment. But sometimes for people saying things like that, because they haven't worked out their own fears in their own life, their own traumas, their stories, then that gets communicated energetically, empathically to the person. So if you come in from a relapse, the mouth is saying, hey man, I love you, you know, just come right back. It doesn't mean anything. But the body is saying, I'm scared. Like I'm scared for myself and I'm scared for you. And I don't even know if I want to hang around you because I'm scared, because then maybe I might relapse. So the body has its own story going on. Or I'm angry, whatever. Or shame. Like I have shame about my own addiction. I can't contact it in my body yet. I'm just coming from my mind. So even though I say things that are non-shaming, the shame within me gets felt by you. That's an environment you have to be careful with because that environment could potentially increase the drivers. Do you all see the external pressure driver? You can see how that would happen in a 12-step environment. I don't want to lump all 12 steps together, people in that, because there are many people in the 12-step program who are really clear around this. And they're not shaming or judging or externally pressuring or increasing people's compulsions because their body and their mind aligns. They've got a mind that doesn't judge. They're clear within themselves. So, because if you're clear within yourself about what you are and who you are and your body, you're going to be clear with other people. There are people like that. But there's a lot of people in that program that are not, even with really good intentions. So that environment is really important to take into consideration. We put new model recovery outside of the Kiloby inquiries. Okay, so the Kiloby inquiries community is here. It's a set of tools people use for a number of different reasons. And we even work with addiction within that there. But new model recovery is over here. And the reason is because we needed to create an environment that is very conducive to new model. So we're really not going to want to welcome people in there that are still shaming and judging and don't get this. Or if they come in, that they're really willing to look at that. We don't want to set up an environment where if you resume use and you share that on the forum, that someone who's really anxious about their own life starts judging you and shaming you unbeknownst to them, which then creates an environment that isn't conducive to just radical inquiry, which is really what New Model is just radical inquiry on everything, awareness-based, not mind-based recovery. So the environment is so important. We'll ask you questions about that. But if you're interested, start to contemplate that a little bit before you get there. Look around at your family, your friends. Is this an environment that's conducive to a new way of recovery, which is not even based on gathering clean time? If you get sober time or clean time, it's wonderful. That's great. If you don't, that's wonderful. That's great. That's what happens. It's reality-based. Reality-based recovery. Reality-based recovery would be whatever happens is what happens. It isn't like something shouldn't have happened, because that's not reality. It's like saying, Byron Katie says, like, it's like arguing that a chair should be a couch. So if somebody resumes use in new model, that's what happened. To say that it shouldn't happen would be like saying a chair should be a couch. Reality-based recovery, which means whatever happens is what happens. We come to acceptance with whatever happens. We go into inquiry on everything until we're so clear that no one else has that power over us anymore. Like, one of the things about the new model is like the full responsibility is placed on your side. The blaming and the shadow projection and all this stuff comes to rest. Of course, if you're in the forum and someone does get triggered, let's say you say, I resumed use yesterday, and someone does get triggered, it's not like they're not allowed there. It's just that we want to say, are you open to looking at the trigger? For the sake of everyone here, are you open to a reality-based recovery instead of the ideal, like trying to make people do something? If you're open to the trigger, then that's fine. What we really don't want to do is create an environment of people who are coming with these old beliefs and strategies and programs around not living in reality, and then coming into the environment and just hunkering down on their position. If we did that, we would have an environment that isn't conducive to this way of recovery. All right. I live in a new model environment with Chester. Chester and I have our issues for sure. I won't talk about his stuff, like whether there's addiction or mental health, but I'll just say that we live in a new model environment. So, listening to my story, so you can get another example of what new model looks like. When I developed the chronic pain, I had a block to taking first painkillers and then other medications because I was still had a holdout from the old way of recovery, which said it doesn't matter whether you're, no matter what's happening to you, unless you're on your deathbed, you don't use no matter what if painkillers are your drug of choice. So there was resistance to even taking them right after the surgery. And Dan and or Chester had to sit down with me and do inquiry because I wouldn't take it. I have one pill in front of me, which would have done really nothing because back in the day I would take 8 pills at a time. I'd have like one pill in front of me or two, and then Dan would facilitate me on not being able to do that. Meanwhile, I'm in pain, so it makes no sense not to take it. Eventually, I was able to take it, and then when I was taking it, I took it for a very short time, for like a week. It's like a week before and a week after surgery, painkiller. And while I was on that, no one around me was judging or shaming or anything. Dan, nothing. Chester, nothing. So what happens is that without having to uh, defend against other people, it was all placed on my side. So when you're defending against other people, like they're pressuring you or judging you, your focus is there instead of on your own experience here. So in defending, it's almost like a complete distraction. And not only is it a distraction, but it fuels the seeking here. See how problematic this is? So I didn't have any of that during the painkillers. And I stopped taking painkillers a week after the surgery, not because of some idea or belief system that I shouldn't take them anymore, but because my body just didn't need them. And nobody was pressuring me to stop, which helped me stop. Strange, but I think you know what I mean. Let's imagine Dan and Chester. Imagine if they came to me while I was taking those and they said, I'm really worried about you, man. Like, this is your drug of choice. Like, what might happen to you? Now, maybe I would have the clarity to just say, well, okay. But what if that would have affected me? And then what happens then is like, either I got to try to stop. And if you've ever tried to stop something, here's the problem with that trying is there's two thought streams that attend a compulsion. Well, there's more than one thought stream. There's two main ones that have to do with preoccupation, being preoccupied with painkillers, for example. One is the thought stream that says, I crave it, I want it. And the other one that says, I shouldn't have it, or I'm bad if I do it. Both of those increase the compulsion. When they're working together, it's like a double whammy. So trying to quit or having people pressuring you to quit actually can increase the aversion line, the second one, the one that says, I shouldn't, or that I'm bad for doing it. When you're hearing that from people, that can increase that line. And anything that increases that line increases the compulsion. But so if Dan and Chester were coming up to me saying that, if that was internalized, it would have added to the second line, making it more difficult to quit and increasing the compulsion. But with them not doing that, and then there was no internal story that I need to quit. That was there, not there. So, or it was a very light one. It was not that kind of like, I've got to quit. I'm going to spiral. I'm going to spiral. So without people pressuring me to quit or use, those lines were very light. And with just a little inquiry, I was able to put that down, no problem. So the new model, the richness of it is an experience. It's not a philosophy. There's no way to put that into a belief system. What happened there for me? That was raw experience, meaning the compulsion was not there because of inquiry and because the environment that I'm in. Now, just so you know how deep this goes, and I just want to share this so you can see why Dan and I are so excited about New Model, because it radically changed everything. Once I got off the painkillers, I went on to Xanax for a while. This was before I had inquiry on emotional repression, so it was the nerve pain, very strong. And I didn't want to take painkillers. My body really didn't want them, actually. So I started taking Xanax, and that drug is fairly addictive, even if you're clear, because it has a withdrawal to it. And when you feel a physical withdrawal, the craving can amp up. So I was on that for a while, not a very long time, but a while. And then there was nobody around me. There was a few times when Chester said some things about that, but then we just inquired into it, and he saw that it was his fear or something on his side. I may have looked at something on my side, but for the most part, neither Dan or Chester, those are the people closest to me. Neither one of them was like, you really need to stop taking Xanax. Like, you're going to be addicted. Where's this going to lead? Didn't do that. And so they didn't in any way inadvertently increase the aversion line. And so all I had to do is, when I was ready to get off of it, is look at the drivers, if there were any, and this preoccupation, and then just very wisely taper off of that drug, and that's gone. So the higher addictive class of drugs, gone because of inquiry and new model environment. And then I went to ketamine. This is all really before the healing of the pain happened. So there wasn't a lot of skillful inquiry during this time because I hadn't yet learned how to bring up the anger repression and the trauma responses connected to pain. Even now I can do that. So then it was ketamine. So ketamine, there's arguments about whether it's physically addictive. I didn't experience it as physically addictive. Did that for a while. Same thing happened. But this time, this gets into new model very deeply here. Until you resolve the drivers underneath something like that, chances are that the taking of that medication or something like it will continue. So the driver for me, taking the Xanax or even the ketamine, was that I was in physical pain. And physical pain is one of the drivers that we illuminate. Science talks about how physical pain is often related to addiction. But then inside the pain was the anger repression, fear repression, and some old trauma. Science says all of those drive addiction. I just keep citing science so you don't think I'm just making shit up. So that was driving it. The repression was hidden within the chronic pain. But emotional repression is a driver. So in lifting up the repression there, the anger was lifted. The anger no longer repressed came out. The pain healed through inquiry. Therefore, the driver went away. And so it was fairly easy to get off ketamine because the driver was gone. And that's the holy grail of a new model, is that there's a somatic no. And until you experience the somatic no, maybe some of you have in different ways, until you experience it, it's very different. It's very hard to talk about because normally the mind is trying to make the decision to stop doing something. And the problem with that is when the mind is trying to do that, it can increase the compulsion because being against something actually makes you want it more on some unconscious level. See that? So with the driver resolved, naturally could let go of that. The healing took place. There was a somatic no. The somatic no will show up in different ways, but one thing is just the absence of the driver in the somatic level. So whatever emotional thing or physical thing was driving it, that gets healed or resolved. And so the body just doesn't crave it like it did before when the driver was there. So there's a somatic no. Environment was important through all of that because even with the ketamine, I actually shared about it on YouTube when I was using it, and people around me knew it, but none of the people closest to me made any judgments about that. So again, all of the elements were in place for like a really authentic recovery from these things. And here's the other thing. People beat themselves up, you know. People in recovery will say, "Oh shit, man, I resumed use, I mean, I had pain or I had something going on and I started using something to make it feel better." And even when they're clean, they'll still beat themselves up. And there's just been none of that. So when I look back at the period where I took painkillers and Xanax and ketamine, it's like, so what? And that's important because having all these experiences, the belief that I'm addicted isn't there. That belief is not there. If you believe you're addicted, you'll find evidence in your history to make it seem true. And the evidence seems to be there. It's like, well, I spent 3 years doing cocaine. I believe I'm addicted to cocaine. Or for me, I did these months on ketamine and a few months here on Xanax. So I'm addicted to belief. Speaking of science, science did a study that said basically people who believe they're addicted have a much higher percentage of addiction in their life. It's more prevalent in their life if they actually believe they're addicted. There's something to this. So if you're sitting here right now believing that you're addicted, did you even know that that belief may be a big part of why you're still using something? Would it even occur to you? See, because we think all of this is reality. We think that reality has shown us that we're addicted. But all that really happened was human being using cocaine that day and that day and that day and that day. Or even if that's reality, it's just, you see what I'm saying? That's all that happened. The mind puts an overlay on that self identity. I. It takes ownership of all of that, pulls all that into its identity, and says, I'm addicted. So, what do we know about sabotage is when you believe these stories, deficiency stories, belief in addiction, you're more likely to act that out in the future because the identity is involved. So once the identity is involved and you believe that you're addicted, then what do identities, deficiency stories do? They want to confirm themselves. What's a perfect way to confirm that you're a self that's addicted? Using again and becoming compulsive with it. And you see the cycle, so then you use again. You look back at what you think is reality, and it's actually you're seeing it as an interpretation of what happened. The interpretation is, okay, I used again. That reinforces that I'm addicted. Then what will my future look like? More of that. That's a cycle that just keeps repeating itself. This is why we look at the addict identity. It's not just because we like being non-dual. It's that the addict identity contains within it the belief that I'm addicted. So strangely, all over the world, people are so eager to call themselves addict, not realizing that science has already said that by believing that, you're believing that you're addicted, there's going to be much more prevalence of addiction in your life. This is the problem when people don't follow science. Just pay attention to it, because there's all sorts of really cool insights there that can help with your inquiry process. Remember, sabotage. If you believe you're addicted, that identity seeks to confirm itself. And the best way that it can confirm itself is to continuing calling yourself an addict, believing that you're addicted, self-perpetuating. Hey, Serena. New model presence and perspective showed me its power to me today, experientially. New model helps to go deeper into those places. Yes, yes, yes. Into those places that I'm very ashamed of. Yeah. Part of new model, people really appreciate the shame inquiries that we have, and because they say that they can't get that depth of work on shame anywhere else. And that came about from experience. Dan and I sitting in the hot tub and developing reverse inquiry and utility inquiry and playing with that and uprooting the deep stories of shame that were there for either one of us, and going into the body and unearthing that emotion, that energy, and then feeling lighter and lighter and lighter around that. And so when you go to all those places, even though it's scary, it has a direct impact on you. I mean, there's Serena saying it right now. It's very difficult to even know what that's like until you go through it. The freedom that comes from working with shame. One of the reasons I'm able to get on here and talk about this is because of the shame inquiries. Years ago, I would have been like other teachers. If I would have been using anything, there's no way that I would tell you. Shame. It reminds me of a story of Ram Dass, who I love, actually. He was in line at a gay porn theater, and one of his students came up to him, and he felt very ashamed that the student found out that he was going to this porn theater. That's what I mean, is we can't be transparent about this stuff with people, then we can't further the conversation along. So if I got on here and said, oh, I didn't do any of that, and I'm perfectly enlightened, and I've recovered completely, and all this, then I would just keep all that information from you and put on a false front. And then meanwhile, if you're suffering in some way, I'll just say, hey, there's no self, get over it, There's deep work that can be done, though, and if we're all transparent, if we learn to be more transparent, like in that forum, if in that forum that we're going to, if it's conducive for everyone feeling like they can be vulnerable and transparent, the healing and the awakening just spreads like wildfire among all of us to be in that kind of environment. So if that sounds good to you, follow us to the new place. Look for a new model of recovery, the section in that new forum, and then we're going to go